Well, the major news going through the United States right now is the illegal military occupation of the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge in Harney County in Oregon. A right-wing terrorist militia has taken control of the property, stormed in when no one was there, and have declared the territory to be sovereign from the rest of the country, and they've declared their intention to remain there for years to come. Now, these are right-wing militia types that were from the Bundy Ranch. In fact, many of them are the exact same people who engaged in that standoff, an armed standoff with the FBI. Now, the three of the sons of Cliven Bundy are there right now. And in fact, it's reported that Amon, one of the sons of Bundy, is the leader of the group. Now, the mainstream media has come up with a cute little name for them, and I absolutely love this because they're referring to them as terrorists, Al-Qaeda. The occupation began after a large group protested the building grounds, demanding the release of Dwight Hammond Jr. and Steve Hammond, two Oregon ranchers convicted of arson charges in 2012. U.S. Justice Department records show that the Hammonds' crime was setting fire to 139 acres of public land, which they were using to poach deer. The Hammonds were resentenced to 5 years in prison in October 2015. According to the Oregonian, Bundy's group plans to occupy the building for several years and turn it into a safe haven for so-called sovereign citizens whose aim is to live outside the reach of the tyrannical federal government. The group is armed and told press that militia members won't hesitate to fire upon police and federal officials. Now, this armed occupation took off from a peaceful protest that was being carried out. These guys splintered off from them and decided to take this kind of radical action. Now, Amon, the son who's in charge, began this occupation after he said that he felt that the fires were set for a good purpose and had good results. In other words, because they were anti-government acts, therefore burning down all that wildlife is okay. Now, the whole point of this group is that they claim to be trying to get people out from under the tyranny of the federal government. And this is a very common thing for sovereign citizens. They consider any kind of government to be some kind of tyranny that's destroying their lives and the lives of everybody else.
So we have basically taken over the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge. And this will become a base place for patriots from all over the country to come and to be housed here and live here. And we're planning on staying here for several years. And while we're here, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be freeing these lands up and getting the ranchers back to ranching, getting the miners back to mining, getting the loggers back to logging, and where they can do it under the protection of the people and not be afraid of this tyranny that's been upon them. And what will happen is Harney County will begin to thrive again. And one time they were the wealthiest county in the state. Now they're the poorest county. Yeah. And we will reverse that in just a few years by freeing up their land and resources. And we're doing this for the people. We're doing this so the people can have their lands and their resources back where they belong. And it's really that simple.
Now, this is the kind of the ideology of the sovereign citizen. They feel that the rules don't apply to them, that they don't have to obey any kind of established authority, that they can just do whatever they want and don't have to deal with the consequences of doing so. And these guys very often try to compare themselves to the founding fathers. And I actually kind of agree with them on that. I think they are very much like the founding fathers themselves. They are people who feel they have some kind of right to take land and resources that they just found and declare it theirs and don't have to be concerned with any of the consequences. Like the founding fathers who came over from England and whatnot and just saw a native territory and just took it and decided to declare it theirs and that they can do whatever they want with it and nobody has a right to tell them what to do because there is absolutely no social consequences to economics or any kind of resource gathering because it's all about them and what they want. That a lot of them stand from the premise, whether they realize it or not, that there's nothing wrong with capitalism, there's something wrong with the government. When you listen to a lot of their statements, they're saying this place is poor because of the federal government. Essentially, there's nothing wrong with capitalism. It has no internal contradictions. It can't do anything bad. It never leads to crisis, and that it must always be the fault of the government. And this is another, a symptom of their really uncritical view of thinking. Another good example would be their a very odd and unscientific understanding of the law. Now, this is the kind of people that they are. I mean, the fact that this is a wildlife refuge designed to defend wildlife means absolutely nothing to them. I mean, that's just completely irrelevant to what they want. And never mind that that's there to protect species, to protect land from being destroyed. It's just whatever they want to do with the land, because this is all about them. Now, this is very much a symptom, as I've described many times, another third world as I've described, a rising right-wing tide within the first world that we've pointed out, many times before, that in the advanced countries, when crisis hits, they do not tend towards revolution. They tend towards reaction. And this is another part of that. We see the failing economic situation of the United States and the rising right-wing tide, the same ones that support Donald Trump, are seeing that rather than coming to the idea that to become class conscious and understand the class structure of the United States, understand the class structure of capitalism and fight for the class interests, instead they have turned rightward into themselves and what they feel they're entitled to be able to take from whoever they want. Now, another good example of this is a recent study that showed that overall 49% of Americans feel themselves angrier now about current events than before. I mean, according to the study, 1 year ago. According to the study, whites are the angriest. With 54%, they have grown more angry over the past year. So look at what we're seeing here. The most privileged sections of the United States population is getting angrier at things that are going on. The beneficiaries of the United States and the higher sections of the imperialist ladder of expropriation are starting to feel like they're the victims. They're getting angry over everything that's going on. I mean, again, this also confirms what we've been saying for some time, that in times of crisis, the advanced countries don't turn towards revolution. They turn towards reaction. And I think it's very interesting that what we're seeing is people carrying out a militarized occupation of federal land. I mean, these are guys with guns, many of them very highly trained in how to use them, many of them ex-US military. So again, we see a case here where when we think about this in the context of removing guns from people's hands, much stricter gun control. We see people like this, and one of the things that I believe, and I'm sure a lot of other people believe, particularly Marxists, is that we should be able to have guns to protect ourselves from people like that. As Marx said, anyone who takes guns away from the workers is a reactionary, and so on and so on. So basically, that's what Marx meant. We should keep our guns to defend ourselves from people like this, not just the bourgeois state. I think it's very interesting that liberals and Democrats are still calling for control over guns, even specifically causing the restriction of the ability of people to carry out self-defense. I mean, do you really think these like Bundy Ranch guys are just going to hand over their guns or like just stop purchasing them because it's not legal? Of course not. This is the same kind of idea that, well, if you just take guns away, criminals won't have guns anymore, which is absolutely false. I really would rather have legal guns to defend myself from these, from Al-Qaeda, than to be standing there like a victim begging for help from somebody else. I would really like to, at the moment when things carry out, be able to defend myself. And it's more of the really nonsense ideas that come out of the liberals and Democrats about trying to control guns in America. As much as they would wish to reduce gun crime, and I certainly understand that they would want to do that, I do feel I really, and a lot of other people really need to protect themselves from people like this. Now, I find that the whole, when you really go into what it was that they're talking about, they want to go on about how they want their own separate economy. They're not directly saying this, but what they describe as this was one of the best counties in the country, and now it's one of the poorest. We want to get the loggers back to logging and the miners back to mining. But understand what they're really saying here. They're saying people aren't mining or logging simply because the federal government won't allow them. Like, that's it. They literally believe that's it. That's why it's not being done. They have absolutely no ability to understand how all of this, all resource collection and management happens under an entire global economic context. A mining company doesn't just not mine because they don't feel like it or because the federal government just says they can't. There has to be a demand for it, and that supply has to meet that demand. I mean, that's basic economics, basic even bourgeois economics. So it's not like any kind of Marxist interpretation on my part. They literally believe that the only reason that land isn't being developed is simply because the federal government doesn't want it to. I mean, never mind the purpose of it trying to be a wildlife refuge to, defend things, defend what's left of the environment, because people with this kind of mentality have been absolutely unholy destructive towards it. They really feel that if they go in there, they're going to form their own mining companies, their own logging companies. They're going to start cutting trees down. They're going to start digging minerals out of the earth, and then they're all going to be selling, and they're all going to be rich, rich, rich because the evil government is out of the way of the economy. Well, I got some bad news for you. That's kind of not how the economy works. Supply does not automatically create its own demand, despite anything Austrians might tell you. Just because you're going to go in there and cut trees down and sell them doesn't mean somebody's going to buy them. We have huge multinational corporations who do mining and logging all over the world who can do it a hell of a lot cheaper than they can and will beat them on price absolutely every single time. I mean, which lumber do you really think is cheaper? The one that these guys are chopping down in Oregon or the deforestation of the rainforest? I mean, there's a reason why, logging tends towards cheaper areas, just like how labor tends to go towards cheaper areas, and why mining tends to be carried out in areas where, standard of living is lower, wages are lower, and access to resources, the cost of doing so is lower. Now, there's a reason for this, and these guys just don't understand that. They literally believe that they're just going to come in, start chopping trees down, start mining, they're going to start selling, and then it's going to be rich. Well, that's really... frankly, that is crazy. One, they have no ability to compete, and number two, what do you think is going to happen when you start shipping those first trucks of lumber out of that wild reserve, assuming they even manage to take it? What do you think is going to happen? Well, they're going to be stopped by the police, the FBI, and those minerals and trees are going to be confiscated because they're coming from stolen land, which would give the government the authority to do so. So basically, you're going to need a private little army that could defeat the US government, following your shipment from there to the customer, assuming they don't just take it from the customer as soon as you leave. I mean, they really don't think these things through at all. All they're really doing is expressing an anger, which the study shows is on the rise among white people, white middle class and upper middle class people, which is something that you can use to describe these ranch people. Now, it's just foolish. I really like to think of them as, along with that term, Al-Qaeda. I like to think of them as a kind of ISIS. I mean, like, really, what is ISIS here? I mean, some of the Bundy Ranch people, particularly the leader here, Ammon Bundy, claims that God sent him to do this. It has a very religious context to his actions.
And that was the first one. And during that letter, I began to understand how the Lord felt about the Hammonds. I began to understand about how the Lord felt about Harney County and about this country. And I clearly understood that the Lord was not pleased with what was happening to the Hammonds, and that what was happening to them, if it was not corrected, would be a type and a shadow of what would happen to the rest of the people across this country. What we were supposed to do, and it became very clear, and I had a hard time with it because it was a very strong stand. And I wrestled back and forth with it, but I knew it was so clear what we were supposed to do. It was like exactly what was happening at the Bundy Ranch when we were getting guided and directed at what we're supposed to do. That's how it was. Whether I am some crazy person or whether the Lord truly works through individuals to get his purposes accomplished, I know that we are to stand now and that we are to do these things now, or we will not have anything to pass on to our children.
I think that's very much like ISIS. You know, they just have a declared religious right that God just came to them in an epiphany and says, you need to take this land and form your own country and declare it yours, and you can do whatever you want, and to hell with the people that say the collective ownership of that via the government, you know, to hell with the government, to hell with, I don't know, the native population whose land you're stealing. Just to hell with them, and you have a divine right to go in and take it. I mean, you can't sit there and say that's not the case when he's sitting there saying that God told him to do it. He is claiming to have a divine right. And is this any different than ISIS? ISIS is trying to build an Islamic state, right in you know, the cradle of civilization, just because they feel that's the right thing to do, and God probably told them to, and we have to because Islam. Is there really any difference here? Yeah. There is a bit of a difference in that ISIS is incredibly more violent than they are, and they're also giving aid to the US government to attack the US's enemies, whereas these guys are just outright going against the United States. So there's a bit of a different context there, but in substance, they're both very similar. They both have what they perceive to be a divine right to go in and just form their own kind of little nation because God or Jesus or Muhammad told them to do so. And one thing that has been very significant through all this, and a lot of people have pointed it out, and it's very true. Why isn't the government doing anything? So Tamir Rice plays with a BB gun in the playground, cop pulls up, gets up, whips out gun, shoots him dead. Never even has it, just doesn't even ask him to put it down, doesn't give him a chance. And all the other, you know, African Americans that have been killed in very similar situations, never given a chance, just outright murdered. But these, and for doing basically nothing, for just standing there, or for having sagging pants, or for having a BB gun. Just children have BB guns, and frankly, you can't always expect your children to be, you know, very smart with these kind of things because you know they're children. Meanwhile, we've got an armed militia of 150 men who declare their intention to kill law enforcement sitting there getting a free ride. Like, come on, like, what's up with this, like, double standard here? I mean, we very clearly do see the double standard here, but I think it's not enough merely just to point out that one is black and one is white. I think one thing that needs to be pointed out here is a very qualitative difference. These guys are in an armed standoff. They have assault rifles, they have body armor, they have serious weaponry. In other words, if the police did just roll in and do whatever they want, the same way they do to African Americans, they're gonna die. And they've already declared their intention to do so. That's an important difference here. Yeah, the police are all tough and everything when they roll up on an unarmed black guy or a child and just shoot him dead. Yeah, it's quite another when they go up against people who are armed and able to defend themselves. Hence, this is why a lot of the rhetoric that comes out of the new Black Panther Party or black nationalism in general is to be armed and to be prepared to fight to the death because, well, it works. It is going to do a bit better. And I know we can make the comparisons to the 62nd and Osage Avenue in West Philadelphia 30 years ago move when the government went in and, May 13th, 1985, when the police just went in and just firebombed everything and just killed a whole ton of people rather than even having a standoff with them. Again, this is another example of the difference between black and white. When the cops came up with black people that had, actually they didn't have weapons, but their assumption was that they had a means of defending themselves, but nothing compared to what was on the Bundy Ranch. They did go in and just killed everybody. And this does show another difference, that even when you're white, you're still going to get away with a lot more. Now, I could also make some assumptions that there's some kind of legal power that's behind what the Bundy Ranch people are doing there, which could end up being tied up in the courts through official channels for God knows maybe a decade, because we've seen the Bundy Ranch guy still going through that right now, still refusing to pay his taxes, still going through unending legal processes to try to get out of it. I think another final important point to keep in mind here is that, you see, what we're seeing is not in this crisis, the further disintegration of U.S. society and its economic situation, the people aren't turning towards their class interests, at least not in the traditional Marxist sense. They're not allying with other workers. They're allying with their own little lunatic fringe group and getting angry at the federal government. And you know there's a gigantic mountain of racism behind their whole organization as well. The illegal immigrants coming to take our jobs, but at the same time don't work and just live off welfare because Schrodinger. We're seeing that. We're seeing that disintegration, and it's not going towards a revolutionary class line. I mean, first worldists can get mad all they want, and then they can turn around and call me names all they want. But the reality of it is right before them. People are not turning towards revolution in the Marxist sense. These guys are kind of turning towards revolution, well, not specifically revolution, but violent militant action in a reactionary sense. I mean, we're staring at it right here. As the situation continues, as the situation in the United States gets worse, people are not going to align along class. We have two alternatives. Jump along to Donald Trump, give into the hate and the mindless right-wing bourgeois ideology, or float on over to Bernie Sanders, who's going to give you all the really nice benefits. He's going to buy you off with everything to make sure you don't overthrow the system. And we see the massive popularity of Donald Trump and the massive popularity of Bernie Sanders. Where's the massive popularity for revolution? It's not there. In both cases, both sides are refusing to understand their class position. And no, but supporting Bernie Sanders doesn't count as understanding your class position, because that's not what they're doing. They're not understanding that the bourgeoisie is an oppressive class. They're going to a guy who's going to essentially just tell the bourgeoisie to give them more free stuff, to buy them off with more concessions. So no, that doesn't count as some kind of class understanding. It counts as a form of reaction because it takes people away from doing revolution. And this confirms a ton of what it is that third worldists have been saying. The revolutionary potential in the first world is not non-existent. It's not significant. You could turn to many groups within First Nations communities who certainly have a revolutionary potential, but their numbers are so small that it's insignificant. The mass of American people are not revolutionary. They don't want to do revolution. And this whole, you know, sovereign citizens of Bundy, Al-Qaeda people is another direct symptom of that. And that's a really important point that I wanted to make here, because I believe that what's going to come out of this situation is, this is very different than the Bundy Ranch standoff, because the militia there were standing on somebody's private property that was under dispute. They were saying that they own it, and then the feds eventually backed off. This is different. This is actual federal land, recognized federal land that's not actually under dispute. And that's going to make all the difference. That's what's going to make the FBI or the police more likely to come in and actually do something. Frankly, I am hoping for a Waco kind of situation to thin out their dumbass sovereign citizen numbers. Because this may very well be the step that makes the right-wing militias go too far. It is one thing to occupy a piece of land that's under dispute. It's another to occupy a piece of federal government that is not under dispute. And I think that's exactly what the case is here. And I think this might be the line that they cross that finally causes the federal government to go in and shut these people down. If you like this video and you'd like to see more of them, then head over to my Patreon page and show your support. Or you can go to the MRN bookstore and check out some of the latest books available. Don't forget to rate, comment, subscribe, and share on various social media.